need a microphone. Can you hear me now?
Flip.
Either A or B. A or B.
Can you clip it on your right up by your neck? We have about 8 people online with me. We're just waiting on a couple people to come back, I think. Give me some help.
Is that better balance?
And this is her.
No, that's fine.
That's your.
Well,
Okay.
Mike, do you have the controls for the projector up here?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Barbara Friedman, and I'm the president of the Triangle Jewish Genealogical Society. I've lived here in Raleigh a long time. I hope maybe our paths have crossed before or will cross in the future. In about 2012, our founder and mentor, Debbie Long, put out a call in the Triangle Jewish community to see if there were people interested in working on Jewish genealogy together. And since then, we have had a tremendous group of people. We have about 80 to 90 members. We met every 6 to 8 weeks until COVID, and then we became Zoom experts and met over Zoom. Zoom gives the opportunity to have speakers from all over the world. So we really have had a great rise of TJGS, we call ourselves. And we hope that you will learn a little bit today about genealogy and enjoy the session. Triangle Jewish Genealogical Society is a member of the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies. Debbie Long is our founder and our inspiration. Our host today at the Cardinal is David Zendels. He is also our treasurer, and we call David the King of Cousins because he has so many cousins. David and Norma live here at the Cardinal. And our speaker today is Mike Kalt, who is holding my iPad for me, which I appreciate it. Mike is a native of Detroit, but has lived in this area for a long time. Went to the University of Michigan and got a PhD in political science at UNC, but is retired from SAS, where he did computer stuff for SAS, and he does computer stuff for us. And he is our technical guru, but he's also very active in the genealogy community worldwide, and he'll tell you a little bit about that, I'm sure. All of us have our reasons for getting interested in genealogy. I had my younger son, who's now 40, when he was preparing his wedding invitation, kept saying to me, "Who are these people? How are they related to me? Why are we inviting them to our wedding?" you gotta do a family tree, Mom. So that's how I started my, for my son. Now his eyes roll when he sees it, but that's beside the point. Mike is gonna go over some of the reasons that people do family trees. He's got a great presentation. I hope you enjoy it. Go for it.
Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. $15 will do. Can you hear me now? Yes.
And let me ask, Mike, will you also ask the folks on Zoom if they can hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting an okay from the folks on Zoom. We have 9 people on Zoom with us.
Apologize in advance of the Zoom folks.
I'm having trouble hearing. It's very
Somebody's
buzzing.
having trouble hearing her.
Yeah.
Yep.
One, two, three, four. Six, seven, eight. Can you hear me now?
Susan and Michael and Robert on Zoom. How's the sound? Mike, would you just go ahead and give us another test one more time, please?
Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Go Tar Heels. I can hold it as long as my arms don't give out. Is that any better out in Zoom land?
Sue Feldman and Robert, can you tell us if when Mike speaks with a mic in his hand, if it's any better?
Try it.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
That's better.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I've now used up all my time for my introduction. All right. I'll be talking about the introduction to genealogy. So this is designed mostly for people who really haven't got much experience in genealogy in general and in Jewish genealogy in particular. And you may have lots of different reasons for why you're here. Most of you probably want to find out about genealogy. Some of you may be already doing genealogy and you want to learn a little bit more. Some of you may be here because your wife or husband, significant others, kicked you out of the apartment. And, this was the first place you came to. And at least one of us is here because they asked me to come in the presentation. So today I'm going to talk about basically 4 things. A little bit about genealogy in general and why it's good for you and why you might want to do it. And a little bit about why Jewish genealogy is different than non-Jewish genealogy. And then I'll get into the real meat of things, how you build and maintain a family tree and get information about your ancestors and relatives. And then if anybody is still left, I'm going to go through an example of how I built a tree. I started with 4 ancestors, I guess 6 of my parents, and built a tree of about 3,000 people from there. Okay, no quiz, but you're going to learn a lot more about my family than you really want to know or need to know about. Okay, so a lot of people think that genealogy is just a family tree, as shown here. And it really is a lot more than just even facts and dates and places. It's really a collection of all of your family experiences and history and stories from the family that your grandparents used to tell. It can also describe what life was like in the old country, or now we're getting to the point where it's life in the old city in the US, and more. So think of it as more than just a family tree on a piece of paper. So why would you even want to do this? Well, some people really want to know, who am I? What's my background? Am I even Jewish? You know, where did my parents and my ancestors come from? Okay, some people don't even care about that, and that's fine. Beyond that, I, for example, wanted to make sure that people in future generations knew about my father and my mother and my grandparents, and who they were, and where they came from, and what their life was like. In my case, my wife and I don't have any children, so about the best we can do as far as leaving a legacy for our family is number one, we're leaving $100,000 to our cat. But we also want to leave the family tree as kind of our legacy to the family. And something I've certainly experienced is that it really brings our family together. Whenever I'm in family gatherings, people ask me, you know, who's the latest relative you discovered? And sometimes I'll be able to tell somebody about cousins they didn't know they had, but lived down the street from them. So I and my relatives are constantly finding new relatives. And finally, I've met lots of people who are in this room just through Jewish genealogy. We have a common interest, and we really geek out on this stuff, and I've made lots of really good friends. Keeps me off the street. Okay, so how is Jewish genealogy different than non-Jewish genealogy? Okay, my wife, bless her heart, is a Methodist. So she doesn't have to deal directly with Jewish genealogy. And as a matter of fact, she had, when we got married, she was given by her, it was passed down to her family, through her family, this very thick book of her family genealogy. As it turns out, he has ancestors who were on the first ship after the Mayflower. So finding things out about my family is a lot different for me than finding things out about her family was for her. Some examples, all of her documents, even the ones going back to England, were in English. The documents that I have to deal with, depending on who the relative and where they were, might be in Yiddish, might be in Hebrew, Polish, German, Bulgarian, Ukrainian, and so on. Most of my wife's historical records exist. She can actually go back and find wills and deeds and so on from the American Revolution, because the records are stuff I just anyway, so she had all these historical records. Originally, they weren't on the internet, but they did exist. Whereas a lot of the records for Jewish families, the European records in particular, a lot of them have not survived over the years. Another interesting difference is that her family has fairly common first names and consistent first names. A guy named John, there's not a whole lot of variations on the name John or Samuel or so on. And whereas I've got a cousin who, depending on what country the document was printed in, his name is either Lee, Hirsch, Henry, Hirsch, written in Hebrew or Yiddish, Naphtali, we call him Hirsch. So finding a record for him trying to use his first name is not going to be that easy. My wife's family tended to have a single last name. Your last name was the same as your father. And generally speaking, non-Jews did not change their name. Jews are famous for changing their name, not necessarily at Ellis Island, but sometimes before, sometimes after getting here. So you might have somebody who was Lipovitz in the old country, and they changed their name to Lipo when they got here. On the other hand, you might have somebody, Stuart Lipovitz, who changed his name to John Stewart. Okay, still more stuff. The spelling of names is consistent for non-Jews. With first names and last names. For Jews, since the original languages we use, especially if you were from Eastern Europe, the original names were not written in a Roman script. You know, they're written in Hebrew characters. So there's no standard transliteration of Hebrew characters to Roman characters. So my Steckler branch, depending on document, might be spelled with a CK, a CH, or a Z, or some other consonant in there. And my wife can find ancestors in lots of different cemeteries that are still in existence and maintained both here and in England. I have no that I'm aware of gravestones left for my ancestors in Europe. And the difference, as I mentioned, the child's name, surname is the same as their father's for non-Jews. But as we'll see in an example I'll come to later, a lot of times for Jews, instead of taking their father's surname, they will take their mother's surname. This makes it very hard to look for records because you don't know which surname to use. Okay, DNA. It's pretty, for non-Jews, it's pretty clear. If you are you share DNA, a lot of it with another person, chances are you are a pretty close relative to that person. With at least Ashkenazi Jews, there's a lot of intermarriage going on historically. So somebody who genetically appears to be maybe a second or third cousin is actually a case of you have two cousins who married each other. Okay, so those are some of the issues. So let's say you decided to start a family tree. How do you go about doing it? And this is the process. You start by gathering initial information to start a tree. And you enter that information somewhere on a piece of paper in a program on the web and begin your tree. And then the rest of it is a never-ending task. You'll do this until you die. And that task involves finding more people and information and updating your tree. And then going back and finding more people and information and adding that, and forever and ever. So let's go through these steps. Let's start with, how do I gather my initial information and start a tree? Okay, first thing you want to do is write down what you know. Presumably, you know your parents' names, uh, hopefully where they were born, where they lived, when they were born, so on. You may know the same about your grandparents, you may not. But just write all that down. Okay, find family documents. You may have a lot of stuff in drawers and cabinets around the house. I'm guessing not many of you have parents still living, so you can't really check their houses, but maybe they left you a safe box or a box of memorabilia. A lot of stuff can show up there. Okay, and the third thing, and this I usually tell, of course, to a lot of young people, I tell them, find your oldest relatives and interview them now. Because they're the ones who have stuff in their heads that is going with them. Now, in your case, you may not have parents or aunts and uncles, but you may have lots of first cousins who know stuff that you don't. So this is a really great opportunity for you to reconnect with some of your relatives that maybe you haven't talked to recently. Okay, once you've gathered all these notes, you can then organize and create a physical tree. And nobody really does their tree on paper anymore. So the most common ways of creating a tree are either with PC or Mac software, and some of the most common packages are listed here. Family Tree Maker, Family Tree Builder, Roots Magic. There are dozens of different software packages. Those are the three most popular. Okay, another way of doing it is to do it online. Go on the web to Ancestry.com, MyHeritage.com, Jenny.com, FamilySearch.com, and build your tree on one of these websites. And there's also a third method, which is kind of a hybrid of the two, which is where you have trees both on your PC and up on the web. And they can actually, you can update one and the other is automatically connected to it and it updates. So we'll talk about some different examples of how to use these methods. Okay, the three, well, basically all of the PC or Mac packages are pretty similar to each other. The example I'm going to use here is Family Tree Maker. And this is the main screen from Family Tree Maker. And what you can see, if you could read this, is the main part, well, here, but the upper center part is an actual tree. So I'm down there at the left with my wife and then my grandparents, and I'm sorry, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. On the left-hand side is a list of everybody in my tree. For me, that's about 3,000 people now. Okay, below in the center is information about me and my wife and our families. And then to the right, since I'm the main focus at this point, is more detailed information about me. Okay, now you can drill down on a lot of this stuff. So for example, if I were to click on my father in the tree, it would open up a page or window dedicated strictly to my father. And it contains all of the information I've entered about him, including where and when he was born, where he lived, when he lived there, where he went to school, where he worked, and so on and so on. In addition to just facts, we have media So you can store pictures, you can store document images in the tree. So I have not only pictures of him, but I have pictures of houses he lives in, images of census records, his wedding record, all kinds of stuff. So this kind of emphasizes the fact that a family tree is not just names and dates on a written page. It can be any kind of media, including videos, including family stories, and so on. Okay, but it can also be a family tree printed out on a page. So here I have displayed a portion of my family tree going back about 5 generations here, 4 generations. And I can actually print this out. Now this would actually print out about 6 or 7 pages wide. And if I went back a couple more generations, it would be about 15 pages wide. It taped together would go all the way across this room. Okay, so the second option you have for making a tree is to use an online genealogy site. I'll discuss some of the more common ones. Basically, all of these websites are free if all you want to do is enter and store information about your family. So you can store names, dates, even media, and so on. Now, they will all also let you search for information, search census records or marriage records to try and find documents. Some of them will let you do that searching for free, depending on what it is you're trying to search. Some of them charge. For example, Ancestry tends to, it will let you search and tell you whether a document exists. But to actually see the document, you have to join Ancestry. And whereas another one, Family Search, you can actually search and see the record for free. Okay, so here's an example of my family tree on Ancestry.com. And again, the visual interface is pretty much like those web programs. So here is a tree view, and down in the lower left-hand corner, you can actually see the entire tree, and I'm zoomed in on part of it, so you can move the box in the lower left-hand corner around to kind of scan across different parts of the tree. And then you can click on anybody's picture and go to a page that deals directly with them. So I click on my father's picture, and now this tells me all about him, where he was born, a nice picture of him. And it also has links to the sources for every piece of information I have about him. Now, this is kind of a little bit of overkill, but you can see his name kind of in the middle section there. And then to the right of that is a list of all of the sources that I can use to validate what his name is. Not that I need to validate what my father's name is, but at least it tells me that these are all the sources that contain his name. And I can click on those sources and it will show me the actual document. Okay, so maybe with the name it's pretty obvious, but for something like where he lived in 1920 or his wedding announcement and so on, it's kind of nice to know where he found that, so you can always go back to it. Okay, this is another one of those websites called MyHeritage. This is a site that's actually headquartered in Israel. And the initial interface is pretty much the same. It's a family tree. In this case, I use all these different websites, but I don't have them pictures uploaded to all of them. So here's just showing the names without the pictures, but I can click on somebody's name, and I'll basically see the same kind of information that I see on Ancestry. Okay, Jenny.com is another website you might use. It's actually owned by the same people as MyHeritage. Jenny is different than most of the others in it's what we call a collaborative website. And what that means is that on a website like Ancestry or MyHeritage, I own and am responsible for my own tree. I enter all of that information and have responsibility for it. Jenny is collaborative in the sense that nobody owns, it's literally one tree that covers everybody in the world. And I can add people to that tree. So the nice thing about using the Jenny tree is that periodically I can go through and I can find relatives that I didn't know about that other people from around the world have added to it. Now, this is a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing because people will add people who are already in my tree, and not only that, they'll spell the names wrong and get half the information wrong. So you spend half your time wrangling with other people and correcting them and so on. So there's good things and bad things. Okay, so we've got all these alternatives for storing and maintaining a tree. Which one should you use? Okay, the main reason for just sticking with the PC or the Mac only software is privacy. That tree is on your machine, it's nowhere else, nobody else can get to it. And that's a good thing in some cases, but as we'll see, it has its limitations. Okay, the advantages of storing your tree on one of the websites is that if you want, other people can see your tree. Now you can store it on the website and say, I don't want to share my tree with anyone. I don't want to make it visible there. And then it's functionally the same as storing it on your PC, and that nobody can see that tree. Okay, but really, if you're willing to share your tree, it's a big advantage having other people being able to see. Because this is where you get cousins contacting you and saying, I saw your tree. I see that you have a great grandfather named Shlomo Cohen. My great grandfather Shlomo Cohen are related. Please send me money. Okay, the other advantage is this is a really good way if you want to build your tree and get thousands of people on it, is that when you do a search on one of these websites and you say, okay, here's a record for my father in the 1920 census, you can click on it and it will automatically add all that information to your tree, including his birth date according to the census, where he lived in 1920, and you can also download, but it will keep a copy of the document. So this makes it a lot easier to update your tree and add documentation and pictures and so on than if you simply maintain it on your PC. Okay, now when I did this presentation for the first time about 20 years ago, those were really your only two options. But now it's pretty common to do something that I would refer to as a hybrid, which means that you have the PC software on your laptop or your desktop, and you have the tree up on a website, and the two talk to each other. And most of the big PC Mac software packages talk to the big websites. Okay. The advantage of that is that you can synchronize the two. Because sometimes, let's say you're doing some research and you're someplace where you don't have a web connection, or you don't even have your laptop, and you write down your notes, you enter them on the PC, and you know there's really no way for you in the library, if you don't have a connection, to get to the website. But if you have your PC there at the library, you can enter the data that you found in the records of the library. And then when you get home, you can automatically update your tree on the web with what was on your PC. So, you know, if you're willing to handle the complexities of it and whatever security issues and so on, the hybrid may be the best option. Failing that, I would say one of the online services would be a better option now, unless you don't have any sort of internet. You live here, you do have an internet connection. Okay, any questions so far?
Will that hybrid go both ways?
Will that hybrid go both ways? Yes. So you can enter, let's say you're on ancestry.com and you have MyHeritage. You can go on ancestry.com, find a birth record for so-and-so, birth certificate or something, and it automatically updates on Ancestry. And then when you're on your PC, you open up MyHeritage and say, synchronize with my Ancestry tree. And about 90% of the time, it will do it correctly. Backups are your friend. Okay, so that's how you can create a tree either on your PC or online. Okay, so I've got my basic tree out there. How do I find out more information? How do I find new relatives? How do I see if anybody's got a picture of my great-grandfather out there? How can I find information about where they came from? Okay, so these are the kinds of things that you want to add to your tree. As far as adding information, you can see the different types of things you can do. For adding people, very often, adding people comes as a byproduct of adding events. Very frequently, you will find a census record. And the census record will list the people in the household of the person you're looking for. And you'll discover this person, sometimes a relative that you didn't know about, was living in the house. Okay, as far as other ways of adding people, I'll show you ways of finding other people who may be researching your family. And you'll also want to keep on finding family members and talking to them and interviewing. Okay, so let's look at how we find stuff. Now, when I started in 1994, the only way to find stuff was going to the archives and finding it by hand, and writing it down and so on. But now I'd say about 90% of the stuff that you'll find is going to be available online. So we'll show how to find that stuff both online and offline. And also you find information by connecting with others. Okay, so these are the kinds of online information that are available. And some of it is general stuff that applies whether you're Jewish or not. So everybody, my wife isn't gonna wanna look at census records, uh, Ellis Island records, US vital records. All of these things are now online, not all of them used to be. Newspapers, a lot of them are, and historical newspapers are now online. The thing you're gonna find out if you got a DNA match for someone, it's gonna be by going. Okay, my wife would not be particularly interested in vital records from Galicia. But I might. So there's a whole series of Jewish specific records that are now online, which didn't used to be, and more of these things are coming online every day. Okay, but there's still some stuff that you may need to get by going to a library or a court or hiring a researcher. Not all vital records are available. Certainly more recent vital records are not, like in the last 70 years, are not available online. Until recently, a lot of the New York City vital records weren't available online, but there's been a lot of lawsuits and so on, and more of that is coming online. Some city directories, especially for smaller towns, may not be online. Court records are only very slowly coming online. For example, I'm from Detroit. I can get online court records from really old ones, but I can't get recent ones. Tax records are generally not online. So for a lot of those records, you'll have to go down to the county courthouse or hire somebody to go there. Same thing with foreign records. A lot of vital records are still only in archives. Same thing with census records, military records, tax records. And in those cases, either if any of you want to travel to Ukraine right now, you visit the archives, you're certainly welcome to, but you might want to hire a researcher to go look at those records. Okay, so how do I find all this information online? Okay, it used to be that the best place was to go to what I would call specific websites. For example, there still is an Ellis Island website where they over time put on all the immigration records of people coming to Ellis Island, index them and put photocopies online. Gold 3 is a website that specializes in military records. The Social Security Administration had its own database. Okay, more recently, all of the big genealogy websites now have indexes for the specialty websites. So you don't have to go to Ellis Island to find the immigration records. You can find them on Ancestry or MyHeritage. Okay, there are some Jewish specific websites, some of which are available through Ancestry and MyHeritage, some of them aren't. One of them is Yad Vashem, discuss it in more detail later. It's based in Israel, and it's basically Holocaust Memorial website, and they have these pages of testimony where you can look up records for people who died in the Holocaust. Same for the U.S. Holocaust Museum. They have a very good website. Okay, so let's go back to those big genealogy websites and how you can search them. So again, I'll tell you a little bit more about the big three: Ancestry, MyHeritage, and Family Search. So ancestry is the biggest of the three. They've got the largest collection of records and is not really significantly larger than the others. You know, it's a case of 1.6 billion versus 1.2 billion. Now, their census records, the actual records themselves, are not free. You can, if you're not a member of Ancestry, you can search for somebody and it will say there's a record for this person in this database. But try and go to the database and see the actual record. Depending on the database, you may have to be a member of Ancestry, which I'm thinking is about $200 a year
Or more.
or more. If you're really into genealogy, it's some of the best $200 the best. As I mentioned, it integrates with not only Family Tree Maker, but pretty much several of the PC-based programs. Okay, myheritage.com is very similar to Ancestry. It's got almost as many records. And like Ancestry, it'll tell you if there's a record for this person, but it may not let you see the record unless you are a subscriber, and the cost, the annual cost is pretty similar. Okay, and I would say there's probably about a 80 to 90% overlap in records between what's available on MyHeritage and Ancestry, but there are some that are on one and not the other. Okay, Family Search is actually run by the Mormon Church. And the advantage of using their site is that for a lot of the databases, including the census, I think, if you get a hit on a search, you can actually see the record without paying any sort of subscription. I don't even think they have any kind of paid plan. So, you know, really costs nothing to have a tree on Family Search and search and find and download or link to records. I don't know that their record collection is quite as extensive as Ancestry. Okay, so let's look at how you might search on Ancestry.com. So you can go to their search page. You can enter the name of the person you're looking for. And then you can optionally, you can enter the name and then hit search. Or you can optionally add more information, where you think they were born, where they live, where they were born, their wife's name, so on and so on and so on. It's really up to you how narrow or broad you want to make that search. Okay, so let's say we search for Jacob Cohen, name only. Okay, we get 80, somewhere here, it says, 80,874 records. And I actually think it was about a year ago. So it's probably 90,000 by now. Okay, so you could go through and look at all those records individually and figure out which of those 80,000 people is your Jacob Cohen. Okay, I would suggest otherwise. Okay, so let's narrow this down. Let's actually narrow it down severely. I know that the Jacob Cohen I'm looking for lived in Detroit, and he was born about 1880. Okay, so let's enter that into the search. And now, and let's look only at census records, I think. Well, I think we're looking at all records, but all we get are two records that both came from the census from the 1950, actually they're both in the 1950 census. And apparently there are two different Jacob Cohens, one born in Lithuania, one born in Russia, who lived in Detroit, in the 1950s. Okay, so if you narrow it down like that, you're likely to get results that are much more meaningful. Should you always do that? Well, it depends. It depends on how common the name you're looking for is. Okay, so if you do a common name, you might want to enter everything you know about him, or and do the search that way. You might want to restrict it to certain types of records. Just only search census records. I don't care about military records because I know he was never, at least in the U.S. Army. Okay. If it's a much less common name, then you may want to just search on the person's name. My great-grandmother's name was Fanny Steckler. Okay, there's a lot fewer Fanny Stecklers than there are Jacob Cohens. Now, it turns out if I search on that name, I think I get about 100 people. But it's a lot easier looking through 100 records than 80,000 records. Okay. Very important. You generally do not, unless you know something, you do not want to do exact searches on names and places. Okay, so for example, if I search on Fanny Steckler, I don't want to search on FANNY. Okay, I want to, well, I want to search on it, but I want to check the box that says search for variants on the name. Because I since found that there are a lot of records where her name is spelled FANNIE. And as it turns out, her real name is Vega. So a search on Fanny, FANNY, isn't going to find Vega. Same thing with last names. I showed you the 3 variations on Steckler. I don't want to search on the exact spelling of Steckler unless I know that's the spelling in the record. And you also want to research from time to time because they're adding records constantly. So if you do a search this year and then go and do it again next year, you may get hits that weren't even in the database this year. The other thing you want to do is maybe you think they lived in Detroit, but unless you have definitive proof that they were in this place at this time, you may not want to limit your search to a specific location. Okay. As I said, recheck periodically. I think what I meant back here when I said check different dates and locations, I mean, if your grandfather was supposedly born in 1880, don't say born exactly in 1880. He may have been born in 1880, but the census, for example, may have a completely different date. At the very least, it's likely to be off by a year because they ask you how old you are, not what year you were born. Okay. You may find other people in the document for the person you're looking for. This is particularly true for census records, for marriage records. You'll find, and death records. I found my great grandfather's name in the death records for my grandmother. Okay, and it's a lot easier to do this nowadays. Get a copy of the actual document because the indexes don't contain all the information that's on the document. Especially if it's one of these European records, and I'll show you an example of that later. Okay, so another place that you will want to do a lot of research is on a website that I haven't talked about yet, but it's probably with Ancestry, one of the two most important websites that you're going to encounter. It's called jewishgen.org, not com.org. It's kind of the grand central station of Jewish genealogy. And not only can you search records there, but you can do lots of other things like find lots of different types of documents and learn things, seminars, connect with other people and so on. Okay, so this was at one time kind of their main page. I think the main page is still pretty much the same, but they got these tabs at the top. So the research tab, which is the second one, under that tab, that's where you can search things, all of the records, but you can also narrow in on specific databases they have, like databases for a specific country, databases covering the Holocaust only, databases covering cemeteries, so on and so on and so on. And these are all Jewish specific stuff. And a lot of this stuff is not available on any of those other non-Jewish websites. Okay, so let's just search Jewish Gen for Jacob Cohen. Okay, here we get 16,000 matches for Jacob Cohen. Okay, you might ask, well, why only 16,000 when I got 80,000 on Ancestry.com? The difference is that Ancestry.com includes not what I would call non-Jewish records. The U.S. Census is not a Jewish database. So Ancestry.com will search the U.S. Census, U.S. vital records. Okay. Jewish Gen will search things like European vital records, immigration records, databases of people doing research on non-Jewish people. So you won't get as many hits as you will on Ancestry.com, but you still may get a whole lot more hits than you really need. Okay, so let's do a narrower search. Let's look on just the Holocaust database for Jacob Cohen, who was from Berlin. And the Holocaust database basically is where you go to look for people who were either victims or somehow involved in the Holocaust. So it could well be survivors, not just people who died in it. So we're looking for Jacob Cohen from Berlin. Okay, once we do that, we are down to only 12 matches. Okay, so again, here's how narrowing down your search lets you find more records. And here, like on Ancestry, it'll tell you where that record came from, and you can click on the link and go and see the specific records. Okay. Okay, I'm going to do another search here. I have a cousin who's a Holocaust survivor. Her name is Carol Sperber. So I'm going to go look for her in the Holocaust database. Because when I started my genealogy, all I knew, I mean, I knew her, and I've since actually interviewed her and put it on tape. But I didn't have any records about where she was and so on. So anyway, I did a search on her and I found 4 records. 2 of them are from the Extraordinary Commission. 2 of them are, one of them is a POW record, and one of them is a list of prisoners in Bergen-Belsen, which is where she was. So this is another example. A relatively narrow search. Find a record that's relevant. Okay, another one of these databases is the online worldwide burial registry. And this is a project taken on by Jewish kids where they have tried to index every grave in every Jewish cemetery in the world, including the US. I don't know that they'll ever be finished, but I think they got several million entries in here. Where I knew that I had named Mickelson, who lived in Bluefield, West Virginia. So I did a search on the Worldwide Burial Registry for Mickelson in West Virginia. And I get a list and I find that there are one, some of them are Michelsons, but the last one is Mickelson, is because of how they spelled their name. And by the way, just about every little southern town has a Jewish cemetery where the guy who owned the clothing store and his wife are buried. Okay, so another one of these tabs on the main page is called Discover. And this is a little broader than the search. And you're not really trying so much to find people here as you're trying to find more background information, like, can you tell me about the town they came from? And so we've got these links, including the Town Finder, Yisker Book Database, links, and so on. So if I go to the Town Finder, my grandmother claims that she was from a town called Spree. I've since found, and she also claimed that she was from Austria. So I have since found that the spelling of the town is S-T-R-Y-J. Okay, now initially I had, before this Town Finder, I had no way of knowing how the town was spelled. So I kept looking for S-T-R-Y. And I looked for it in Austrian and I could never find it. But now, using the Town Finder, you can say, well, find a town that's spelled like Spree. Okay. And so I did that. And I also looked Austria and Ukraine. And so I get Shehors, which I don't know why that sounds like Spree, carrots, and then Spree. Okay, well, that third one looks like a winner. And I see that, yes, it could be spelled S-T-R-Y, but it's also spelled S-T-R-Y-Y, S-T-R-Y-J, and so on and so on. So let's click on this. And I get to this page here. It tells me even more. And my favorite part is it tells me in the top page section there what country it was in at various points in history. So my grandmother was right. When she left, it was in Austria. Okay, but then it was in Poland, and then it was in the Soviet Union, and now it's in Ukraine, and now it may be in Russia. So this is a really good way if your ancestors have told you where they're from, you can't find it on a map. This is a good way to find out where it is and find out more information about the Yisker Book project. As I hope, assume all of you know, Yisker books are books that were written after World War II by the survivors of towns that were either wiped out or decimated, or the Jews were wiped out or decimated by the Nazis. So the surviving people in the town got together and wrote a book about the town that typically contained the history of the town, what life was like before World War II, what happened in World War II, and also contains a list of the people from the town who died in the Holocaust, and sometimes a list of people who survived the Holocaust. And there's literally hundreds of these books. And what Jewish Gen has done is they set up a project to find these books. And most of them were written in Yiddish, some in Hebrew, a couple of them in English, some in Russian, German, but try and get them translated into English and also get those translations put online. Okay, and so you can search for the town you're looking for. And this is the cover page of the Yizkor book for Spree. So the title is called Sefer Spree, which I think means Book of Spree. And I was actually involved with this. You know, we had people who know Hebrew a lot better than I do, actually translated into English, and then I took that English translation, converted it to HTML, and converted to a web page. So you can click on any of these pages and read the actual book in English. In all the, I'd say, major towns with 5,000 people in Europe, probably something online. Even if it's not online, you can use the database to find out a lot of libraries have hard copies of the books. Okay, another way of doing research on towns and getting more background information about the town, what it was like back then, what it's like today, and so on, is something called Genealogy links. And you can, again, search your town or Soundex search. And so here I'm looking, I'm just listing all of the towns that are now in Ukraine that have Genealogy links. Okay. And one of the towns is Gorodok, which is in Ukraine now. And this is where my father's side of the family came from. Okay, and this is the link page for Gorodok. And again, it dozens of different spellings of it. I wrote the page and set it up, and it basically contains everything I know or could find out about Gorodok. So I either have or have links to pictures of the town from back in the day, pictures of the town when I visited it in 2000, a map of the town from the early 1900s, a map of the town from 2000, stories from people who lived there. Basically, if you want to know anything about the Jewish community that existed in Gorodok, either then or now, there was one guy left in 2000, he since passed away. You can find it on this page. Okay.
What does Kahila mean? Community.
Community. Okay. One more thing. I'm just at Discover is something called research divisions. Have you ever heard of something called a STIG or special interest group? It's kind of a computer thing, and it's a group of people who have a common interest. Sometimes you'll hear birds of a feather who will get together to do research on a particular thing of interest to them. Well, that's also the case with Jewish genealogy. There are a lot of people who are interested, for example, in Sephardic genealogy. Do we have any Litvaks here? Okay, there are any Galicianos here? Okay. You stay away from that. Okay, so there are groups of people who are interested in Lithuanian genealogy or Galician or Turkish genealogy and Scandinavian. So what they've done is created web pages that contain a lot of research information on those areas. So one of the groups is called the Litvak State. And you can go to this page and connect with others and find information that's specific to Lithuanian Jewish genealogy. They're providing equal time. This is the Gesher Galicia page, which does the same thing for Galician genealogy. And a lot of times these pages will have inventories of records that you can't find anywhere else. That's becoming less and less common as the databases are becoming integrated, but it's very helpful to go to one of these specialty pages. Okay, Jewish Gen offers a lot of educational opportunities, including online seminars through Zoom, recorded seminars, downloadable documentation on how to pursue Jewish genealogy and so on. So you can go to that, one of the links, learn. So if you click on the learn link, you will come to this page, and on this page, you can search for training. A lot of it's free, some of it they ask for a donation, and so on. Okay, the last tab I'm going to talk about is the Connect tab. This is where you go to connect with others who may be doing research on the same family or the same area you're interested in. Now, some of that would be covered on those Birds of a Feather or research groups, but this is also a place to look for stuff. Okay, and one of the things, the links here, we have a family finder, and we have the discussion group, and I'll also talk about the okay, the family finder is a way to find other people who are researching either a particular family name or a particular town or area. Okay, so you can enter your family name or your town. Okay, so I looked for Sperber, which is my grandmother's grandparents' name, and I get 72 people searching for the name Sperber. Well, as it turns out, Sperber is not that uncommon a name. And of these 72 people, I actually found like 3 or 4 who were actually looking for people who were connected with me or looking for Sperber in the towns that my grandparents came from. So, you know, I wouldn't use it to just look for Cohen, you know, here when it's done. Are there any Cohens here? Sorry.
They are.
Okay, there is another link there called the Jewish Gen Discussion Group. Okay, this is useful when you have a question, but you don't know who to ask. You know, my grandmother said she was born in some town. I can't find any reference to it. I looked in the family finder. I'm at a dead end. Here's what I know. You know, who do you ask? You could come here, and we probably find it for you. But what if you're not fortunate enough to live in the triangle, and Debbie and all? Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way you could literally throw your question out to the entire Jewish genealogical world And that's what the Jewish Gen discussion group is, a way of asking questions of everybody who uses Jewish Gen. Okay, so what you can do is to post your question. You can also use this to see if somebody has asked your question before, or to just find what information is out there on. So I was kind of curious, has anybody posted any questions about Spree? So I entered Spree as my search term and got 3,600 hits. Because this actually goes back like about 25 years. Okay, and I could have done it, narrowed it down some, but I get people posting the news that we've added records from Spree to an online database. I'm looking for somebody from Spree. Celia Grunhall, as it turns out, is a relative one. So this is a real good place, even if you don't have a specific question, but you just want to find out whether somebody has done some research or found something about a particular location or topic, to get that information. Okay, the last Jewish Gen thing, we're going to talk about something called viewing. And where this is handy is you got a record or a picture, and you need somebody to interpret that record. For example, you found in your grandmother's closet a record of some sort of vital record, but you have no idea what it is because it's written entirely in Yiddish. I need somebody to look at this record and tell me what it says. That's what viewing is all about. What you do is upload a copy of your record. It could be a picture, it could be a vital record, could be a census record, something like that. And then ask the community out there, could you take a look at this record and tell me something about it? Okay, so I happen to have a record. It was an old Hungarian census record, and from 1888, actually a Galician record, and it was one of these things I didn't know about the phenomenon. At the time, I didn't know how common it was for Jewish children to take on the name of surname of their mother instead of their father. And so I was very confused because let's see, it appears the children on the record are Bluma, Lee, Yessel, and Joseph, all born to Bill Kurtzbauer. But there's another child whose last name was Gertrude. Why the difference? And so I put it out there, and I got a very detailed response from this guy who turns out to be a researcher in Poland who I since used to look up records in the archives there, explaining what happened. And as many of you may know, a lot of the births in Eastern Europe at that time to Jewish parents, the parents weren't legally married. They were married by a rabbi, but the government didn't recognize the marriage. It wasn't filed down at the county courthouse. So when in the marriage record, the birth record was actually filed in the Jewish community, and it gave the child the maiden name of the mother. So anyway, it's very good for those records. Okay, a few more important things. I mentioned the Yad Vashem pages of testimony. Holocaust Museum, and I'll also tell you a little bit about routes to roots. Okay, Yad Vashem is in Israel. They're the main Holocaust memorial organization there. And their biggest resource there is pages of testimony. So what you had after the war, as soon as Yad Vashem opened up, people would visit there and they would fill out a page of testimony to a Holocaust victim or sometimes to a Holocaust survivor and write down everything they knew about that person, who they were, where they were born, what their parents' names were, how they died, when they died, and so on and so on. And for a lot of people, this is the only record existing of what happened to specific people. And so initially, you had to go, if you wanted to look somebody up, you had to go to Tel Aviv, or it's in Jerusalem.
It's Jerusalem.
And look it up and read it. The hard copy. And eventually they indexed it, and now this stuff is all online. So you can go to yadvashem.org and do a search. And they also have translated the Yiddish and Hebrew, Russian, Polish into English for most of the fields. So there's a lot of stuff here you won't find anywhere else. Okay, Holocaust Museum, they have a number of databases. One of the neat things they have is they've done a lot of interviews with Holocaust survivors, including a cousin of mine who still has a fascinating story. And so you might find somebody who actually was from the same town as your ancestor, and they can tell you in excruciating detail what happened in that town during the Holocaust. Okay, last thing I want to talk about here is something called the roots to routes foundation. Is the route? No. You know?
Roots to routes.
Anyway, it's right on the webpage. Okay, anyway, so as I mentioned earlier, not every vital record in Europe is online. A lot of them don't exist, but there are a lot that are still in archives that we haven't gotten to yet, or that have not been indexed. So sometimes you may discover you may have found out that your grandparents were married in, let's take a town, Scree in 1922. Okay. And but you can't find a record of their marriage in any of the online databases. But the record might be in an archive somewhere, but it hasn't been indexed yet. So how do I know what records are what are? Okay, and that's where roots comes into play. You can do a search, and it will list for you, like you can do a search on Spree and marriage records, and it will show you for what years the records exist for Spree, what type they are, whether they're online or not. So if something exists, but it's not online, it will tell you what archive it's in, and you can hire a researcher who's willing to go to the archive and actually do the research for you. Okay, so those are all ways of finding people, finding information, adding it to your tree, and continually updating your tree. Okay, and I covered a little bit about connecting with others, and there's still more ways of connecting with others. Debbie, what do you want to do about it?
Well, I think we need one. And I think you need one. And there's food and coffee out there. So I'm going to ask the folks who are on Zoom to gather their thoughts and see if they have any questions. And why don't we take would a 15-minute break work for everybody? Is that sufficient? I'll put a timer up on the screen. Just give Mike a chance to catch his breath as well. And then I'm sure you have some specific questions you can address when we come back from our break. Sound good? It better sound good. I'll put it's 2:25, so we'll be back here at 2:40. Okay, and let me ask if the folks on Zoom have any questions. This would be a good time to ask those as well. Mike, I'm going to move you just.
Um, okay, so the next session will be about connecting with other people. I've pretty much concentrated on stuff you can do if you're locked alone and don't get a microphone. Okay, and so from that, I will move to how you could reach out to the world and not only get more information, but find friends and hang out with people. uh, various other things like that. So let me. Okay, I had previously talked a bit about the fact that one of the advantages of putting a tree online with Ancestry or MyHeritage is that you can, if you want, you can make your tree available to the entire world. You can make it available to specific people. You can make it available to nobody. It's totally up to you. So, as an example, one of the things you can do on Ancestry and a lot of these other sites is you can search other people's family tree. So what I did was I searched on Ancestry for other people who had family trees that contained the name Morris Sperber, who was my grandfather. And I wound up finding 23 different trees. And one of the interesting things I did find is that there are a whole lot of these people out there who I didn't know, but had my grandfather in their tree. Okay, and as it turns out, all 20, well, I think of these 23, there were about 12 of them who actually had my grandfather in their tree. And all 12 of them had gotten it from my tree. And then subsequently went in and entered bad information in the tree. That is one of the things that you've got to be aware of. If you do find somebody who has branches of your family that aren't in your tree, but are in their tree, that the information they have is not necessarily accurate. Now, I pride myself on putting stuff out there that I've researched and documented. But it's sort of like a game of telephone. And by the time it gets to the fifth person down, suddenly your great-grandfather is a woman who lived in China. And so, despite the fact that I didn't find anything new with this search, I have found it with other searches and connected with people who were my relatives, and we combined our trees and I expanded my trees by quite a bit. Okay, I also mentioned the Jewish Family Finder previously, and here's a case where I did a search on the name Kalt, my father's family, from the town of Groningen, which is where I knew they were from. And the first person who comes up on the list is me. But the other person who comes up is this guy I had never heard of. Now, I initially did the search back in about the year 2000, and I connected with the guy, and he turns out to be like a fourth cousin of mine. And he also, I think he was actually born there and had a lot of documentation, and he'd drawn maps and so on. And so I was actually able to connect with him through the Family Finder and find the British family. Okay, I previously mentioned the Jewish discussion group as a way you can put our question. Does anybody have any information on the Cohen family? And maybe be a little bit more specific, but you may find somebody out there. Okay, and there are other ways that are not necessarily online or partially online. Particularly valuable group that I have found over the years is Plus. And I can't tell you how much I have learned from other people and not just the individual people, but the presentations. And we have presentations, not just for local people, that we they have presentations with people who are famous, such as it is in the Jewish genealogical world. And it's been very informative. Okay. So Debbie is giving you all the stuff I think you need to know more about us. Okay, and one last thing I want to talk briefly about, and much more briefly than it really deserves, because it turns out to be an all-day topic on its own, is you can connect with other people, find cousins, through DNA testing. Okay, so one of the reasons you might want to have your DNA tested is obviously to find relatives, but there are other reasons you might want to find things you might want to find out, like genetic traits that may or may not be related to illnesses, diseases. You can use it in some cases to find out geographically in the world where your ancestors lived. Interestingly enough, I found out that I am 99% descended from people who lived within a 20-mile radius of each other. You could use it to find out whether you're Jewish or not. Now, it won't help you find out if you're related to Sammy Davis Jr., for example. But for certain people in certain situations, it can tell you that. It can also help you determine whether you're Sephardic or Ashkenazi. Okay, so there are basically three types of DNA tests you can get. One is something called Y-DNA, and that will tell you if you're connected with people in your paternal line. mtDNA, is mitochondrial DNA, will tell you if you're connected with people in your maternal line, and an autosomal will tell you about people in both lines. And different tests will analyze different types of the data. Okay, now there are certain things you've got to be aware of when you're doing DNA testing if you do it. And probably the biggest one is endogamy. And that simply means, at least for Ashkenazis, we're all related. Because if you take a population and stick them all in the same place for 500 years, without, in some cases, without being able to get out of that place, you're going to have a lot of intermarriage. And because of that, we have that problem I described earlier, which is the DNA test may show that two people are second cousins. But as it turns out, tests can't really tell whether they literally are second cousins or that they share DNA because you have both descend from people who were fifth cousins, but had previous cousins married before them. Okay, as I alluded to before, you can't always use whether you're Jewish. And the Sammy Davis example, if somebody converts, their DNA is not going to convert with it. Okay, trying to figure out whether somebody is a relative, like you have a match on your paternal DNA, but they may not have the same surname or anything related to yours because their surname actually came from their mother, not their father. Okay, so there are almost as many DNA testing sites as there are food clubs. And these are some of the more popular: 23andMe, Ancestry, Family Tree, MyHeritage. And they all do different tests. So the 23andMe, they kind of, they're the best place to go if you want to find out the health implications of your DNA. They actually started as a company analyzing that. Now they also are involved in the genealogical stuff. And they will do mitochondrial and autosomal testing. Ancestry DNA, which is connected with the Ancestry.com folks, is typically used for genealogical analysis, and they only do autosomal. Family tree DNA will do actually all three kinds, and they will do genealogy. They're good for genealogical stuff. I get to the point where I can't say the word genealogical anymore. I'm gonna quit. And my heritage also does genealogy and autosomal. So depending on where you get the test, you may get different types. Now, each site, you can go to 23andMe and it will tell you who matches you on 23andMe, but it won't tell you whether your autosomal DNA on 23andMe matches somebody who did their test on MyHeritage. Yeah.
If you're subscribing to one of these different types of tests, do you have a choice? Do you make a choice or do you do it yourself?
Okay, so the question was, do you have a choice when you subscribe to there's multiple ones? And I think you do have a choice, and you pay so much for each one, so you could in theory get all three on one site if it offered all three. And I would presume that it would then tell you if you got matches on any one of them. Okay, but if you're on one of the sites that only offers one, all is not necessarily lost as far as comparing across other sites. There is a site called Genealogy, and there's probably a few others like it. And what they let you do is you can get your DNA results from any site you take it from. They will send you a file in a special format that contains all the DNA information they got. And you can then upload back to the GEDmatch site. And then GEDmatch will compare across the different types of tests. And it will tell you, you match these people on rDNA and these people on mtDNA and so on.
It'll also tell you if your cousins, they can also find out if you or your cousin is a criminal. That's the site that they're using for forensic genealogy.
For those who used it, you can also use it to find out if it's a criminal.
Yeah.
So far, I only have one cousin who I know has done prison. Okay, so this was for the ancestry DNA. And I got a bunch of matches. As it turns out, most of the people, basically every DNA test I have done a match on, and every person that says that I am a first cousin or second cousin of is somebody I already knew of. I am the poster boy for the failure of DNA websites in that I have yet to find a new relative through the DNA match. Like I said, there's a lot more in DNA testing and using it to find matches than I can cover here. So there's lots of stuff on the web. Okay, I'm going to, the conclusion here is I'm going to take everything I told you and actually use it in a real life situation. I'm going to go ahead and build a tree. And I'm going to start with my maternal grandparents, Morris Sperber and then Adele Kurtzbart. Do I look like them?
Look like your dad, sure.
Okay, so when I started this in 1994, this is literally all I knew. Because my grandmother was the only surviving grandparent I had. She survived, she lived until 1976. So my grandfather was born in the early 1880s in Spree, Austria. That's what I was told. He married my grandmother, who was a couple years younger than her, in Europe. Okay, and presumably they came over. Okay, that he had a brother named Tolman who lived in New York City. And my aunt, their oldest child, was born in December 1913 in the United States. Okay, and was born in Grand Rapids. Okay, and that my mother was born in 1916, also in Grand Rapids. And that they moved to Detroit not long after my mother was born. Okay, so that's all I know. I don't know who my great grandparents are. And this is about as much as I knew about my father's side, too, but we're giving him the day off. And so this was my maternal family tree when I started all of this. So my mother is right there, Pearl Sperber, born in Grand Rapids. My father, my father. So and I'm down on the right. You don't know. And I've got two brothers. Okay, and my mother had a sister and a brother. Okay, and my grandfather's brother is also up there. Okay, and a couple of other facts I knew is that I had some cousins named Sperber who lived in the Detroit area, but I had no idea how they were related. Okay. And my mother had mentioned that she had a cousin named Weinbeck. But I didn't know how they were related or where they came. All right, so let's get this thing started. Well, I had some stuff that was fairly easily accessible. We got a very nice family cemetery. And that's my grandfather's tombstone. They won't let them hold tombstones like that anymore. But I subsequently found out that the Hebrew translation on the bottom there is Moshe Mordechai, my grandfather, son of Methel David. I now know my great grandfather's name. Okay, then I started looking, and actually this was, I'm showing ancestry here, but I actually started my research at one of the first websites, the Ellis Island website. And I looked for my grandfather. I knew he came over. And so I'm looking for Morris River. I'm looking for the exact name. Okay, well, I got a lot of Morris Rivers, but none of them are my grandfather, at least based on the birth date, when they came over. And a lot of these are the same person who was born about 1890 and apparently sailed between the US and Panama several times. And then another one sailed in England and Morocco and so on. But anyway, none of these are my grandfather. Okay, well, let's search for other alternate spellings. So you can do, like you can search for M. Sperber or M-O-R Sperber. So, well, I did some more searching and I found a Moses Sperber who came over in 1906. That might fit, because I know he came over between 1930. And since he was born about 1880, if he came over, when he was a young man, that would be about 1900 or so. So that would make sense. Well, let's kind of look at the record and see. And we have a Moses Berber who, I don't remember for, but when he arrived, he was sent to his brother, Colin, who
Ah.
lived on East 8th Street in New York. Okay. Well, that's a pretty good bet. Okay. Okay, but how did my grandmother get here? Okay. We knew that she came over, that they were married in Europe. Okay. So if she came over, chances were with my grandfather's name, not her maiden name. So I looked for her and I found an Adela Sperber and who came over in 1913, March 5th, to be exact. The USS Rotterdam, and she was born in about 1885. So that's a pretty good bet. Okay, so let's look at that record. Okay, she arrived on March 5th, 1913 on the Rotterdam. She was from Spree, Austria, and her closest relative in Europe was her brother, Kalman Kurtzbart. Now, an interesting thing is that my mother heard it told me that she had a brother named Kalman. And she also said that my grandfather, after he arrived, tricked her into coming over. That he said that her brother was going to come over to the US and that she should go to Bremen to see him off. And apparently what happened is she went to Bremen with him and he put her on the ship and he stayed back home. Okay, and the other interesting thing is that her destination in the USA is listed in Chicago. So this tells me several things. Number one, that my grandfather moved from New York when he arrived to Chicago sometime between 1906 and 1913. And we also know that they must have moved to Grand Rapids between the time she arrived in 1913 and the time my mother was born in 1916. Okay. The other interesting thing is that my aunt was born in 3 months and 9 months and 5 days after my grandmother arrived. So the other fact I can apply on this is that my grandfather was very happy to see us.
A joyous reunion.
Okay. I subsequently looked for my grandfather in 1910 census records in Chicago. And boom, there he is. He lived in a rumor, it's a rumor, in 1506 West Taylor Street in Chicago. He worked as a carpenter for a bed company, which makes sense because I knew that he owned the furniture factory eventually. And his parents were both from Austria, which was true at the time, and they spoke English. One of the neat things about this record is that a couple of years ago, I went up to Chicago to visit Debbie, who was staying there at the time. And while I was there, I decided to go to 1506 West Taylor Street. And it's a vacant lot, but it's a really nice vacant lot. It's all kept up, and all of the buildings around it from the period is still there. And I got a really good sense of what the neighborhood was like when he lived there. Okay, so the next record I was able to find was his World War I draft registration. And now I still didn't know his exact birthday. He was born around 1880. Okay, so from this I find out his birthday is March 7th, 1881. And that in September 1918, which was when the draft record is from, Fisher body making, back then, car frames were made out of wood. It was carpet. Okay, now, not all of the information that I could find about him initially was offline. Now, this record is now online, but at the time I actually had the right to the Social Security, the Michigan Department of Vital Records to get my grandmother's bit. Okay, and it says that she was born March 28th, 1884. Now, don't believe everything you read on the death certificate. The person who died didn't fill it up. This was filled out by my uncle. Okay, and he said that her father's name was Abraham Kurtzbard, and that her mother's name was Blema, and her last name was unknown. Okay. So that was the assumption that Blema was some unknown last name here, Abraham Kurtzbard. Okay. Much other information I got from here. Okay. But then I got my grandmother's Social Security registration record. Okay. And there, the mother's name is listed as Blema Kurtzbard, and the father's name is Ariel Osborne. Okay, which is totally different than what my uncle did. Okay. Here's what I come to find out. Number one, if you look on my grandmother's tombstone, it says idol boss Abraham, or idol daughter of Abraham. Well, as it turns out, if you don't know the name of the person's father, you use the name Abraham. Okay. So my uncle, having looked at the tombstone, assumed his name was Abraham. Okay. And knowing that my grandmother's maiden name was Kurtzbard, he logically assumed that her father's name was Abraham Kurtzbard. Okay. But here, and my grandmother was alive when this was filled out. I don't know that she filled it out. Note that the birth date is different. Here it's April 28, 1885, as opposed to March 28, 1884. And this was filled out in 1963. So she would have been 80, almost 80. This was filled out. So I don't know that she filled it out. But so we still, who's Israel Fosberg and who's Abraham Kurtzbard? Okay, so let's see if we can find records. Maybe find her birth record. Now, this was certainly wasn't available in 1994, but after 2000, we're starting to get vital records from Ukraine. Okay. So first I'm looking for my grandfather. So I'm looking for Moses Ferber in what is now the Ukraine. So when you do a search on Jewish, you want to search in the country that it is now. Okay, so I get some hits. And golly gee, I got a hit for at the very bottom of Moses Norco. Moses Norco. Okay. Sperber / Weinbeck. His father is Methel Sperber. His mother is Aya Russell Weinbeck. And the mother is from Spring. Okay, so this explains a couple of things. Number one, now I know where the Weinbeck came from. Okay, number two, this record indicates that the records actually came from Sunmore, which is a town about 50 miles from the street. So my grandfather was not born in Street, but his mother was. Okay, the other thing is, he has three brothers that I didn't know about. Loser, Solomon, and Ellie. And there's no Coleman in there. Okay, as it turns out, I later did find Coleman. Okay, now, this is the index of the record. Okay, but this isn't the record itself. The record itself is handwritten. Okay, and this is, remember that unique thing I talked about where you post the picture? This is where it's really helpful. Okay, among other things, there are people who specialize in reading stuff that's in German, but they can read handwriting. So it says, Hierarchical Weinbach and Sambor was married according to Jewish rite with Messel Sperber. Okay. And then the profession, we never did figure out what that said. Okay. Let's see. And he is the daughter, no, she. So Chaya Ruchel is my great grandmother, which I didn't know about. And then she is the daughter of Elia and Cabo Weinbach, the PLA letter from the street. So I now have not only my great grandparents, but my great great grandparents. And then there's all this stuff that I can't read, so I send it off to you. And I think that's where we are. Okay, what about my grandmother? Okay, well, I did a search on her and I found her birth record. Now, the interesting thing about this is that these were all the records in yellow are from the last four. Mother is Bill Kurtzberg, but there is no father listed. And the children are Bluma, Lieb, Joseph, and Joseph. Okay. And then up here is Idle. Idle Kurtzberg, born in 1882, the daughter of Blima Kurtzberg. Okay. Well, remember from that death record, we knew or presumed that my grandmother's mother's name was Blima. So an Idle born in 1882 to Blima Kurtzberg, that's a pretty good, that's my grandmother. Okay. And so we see that her name, at least when it was registered, was Idle Kurtzberg, taking her mother's last name. Okay. And interestingly enough, these people down here are Blima's brothers and sisters, and their mother is a Will Kurtzberg, and we don't know who their father is. So the maiden name wound up getting passed down to like 3 generations. So now I've got all these great aunts and great uncles and so on that I never knew about. Okay, here's the hard copy of Idle's birth record. It says the mother is Blima Kurtzberg of Rizachia, which is not street. Well, as it turns out, I wouldn't call it a suburb, but it was a town about 5 miles from the street. So all the births were recorded in street, but she actually lived in another little town. Okay. Now, Blima is the daughter of Nachman and Bill Kurtzberg, Liziasha. And no father is. Okay. So we know a little bit more. Okay, remember I said I had a bunch of Sperber cousins in Detroit, but I didn't know how we were related. Well, one of my father's grandfather's brothers was Lutheran. And as it turns out, he had a son named Joseph, who lived in Europe, and Joseph had several kids. And those cousins were born in Europe, were survived the Holocaust, some of them did, and they came over to the US and settled in Detroit. They actually, after they got out of the concentration camps, they heard that they had a cousin or an uncle who lived in Detroit, and they sent a letter addressed Sperber, Detroit, USA.
Oh.
And it got to my grandfather, and he paid their way over. And so this opened up an entirely new branch of cousins. Okay, I can also search other trees on Ancestry for people named Sperber. Okay, and this tells you about the problem I pointed to earlier. Most of the Morris Sperbers on Ancestry are in fact my grandfather, and people have entered additional information, most of which is incorrect, but occasionally I do find some people. So some other person had my grandfather in the tree, and then his children, one of whom was my uncle, and he turns out the person who lived in the tree was related to my uncle's first wife. Okay, so I got all of her family, and so on and so on, and that's how you get 3,000. So the point is, with a little bit of research, you can start with literally 4 people in your tree. And I think I've actually gone a little bit further. I go all the way back to 1850, 1810 on this tree. You know, my father's bridge, I go back to somebody who was born in 1770 and so on. And, you know, Debbie was mentioning you get addicted to this was the tree, it's even bigger now. So these are all the descendants of my great grandfather. It's even bigger now. So Debbie put it up that you get addicted to this, and you know, I could literally spend 8 hours a day for the rest of my life on Ancestry.com. And by the end of it, after however long I lived, I could have 10,000 relatives and no trace of human life. Okay, so what I've covered today is figuratively, not literally, the tip of the iceberg. And you can keep on learning about genealogy. The best way, of course, is to join us. And I hope you will. And I appear not. Is anybody sleeping?
No, nobody's,
Okay.
they're not snoring.
Who needed naps. I've already left. Thank you for your time and any questions.
Give everybody a second, yeah.
Where is the family finder? Because there's so many different places to go. Where is family finder? Why would you use
That,
Can you go live on the net? Guest 4030, I think it was. Yeah, capital G. Mhm. Is it working?
Okay.
Still not showing up, Mike.
Huh?
Still not on the screen. Is it plugged in? There you go.
Okay, so we're going to next, family finder. This, family. Okay. So you search here.